In rock history, few bands burned brighter or faster than Van Halen. They lived loud, played harder, and rewrote what it meant to be a guitar-driven band. But behind the wild solos and stadium anthems, the members of Van Halen always carried deep respect for great singers, voices that could lift a song from good to legendary. After decades of success, chaos, and reinvention, the band finally opened up about the 5 singers they truly loved, artists who inspired them, challenged them, or simply left them speechless. Let's dive into the voices that earned Van Halen's admiration. Eive, Robert Plant. Long before Eruption, or Jump, there was Led Zeppelin. Eddie Van Halen often said that Robert Plant's vocals were untouchable, raw, powerful, and alive. He loved how Plant could sound both wild and soulful at the same time. It wasn't just about range, it was attitude. Plant sang like he was born on stage, with a scream that carried freedom in every note. Van Halen's early shows often borrowed that same energy. David Lee Roth channeling Plant's swagger, Eddie channeling Page's intensity. Plant wasn't just a frontman, he was a force of nature. And for Van Halen, that was the goal, to sound like a band barely holding on to lightning. For Freddie Mercury, no list of great singers is complete without Freddie Mercury. Eddie once called him a performer beyond category. Van Halen admired how Freddie could turn any concert into an experience, commanding thousands with just a glance or a note. It wasn't just his vocal power, it was his musical intelligence. Freddie wrote melodies that sounded impossible, yet made them sound effortless. During Queen's U.S. tours, Van Halen would often catch their shows whenever possible. Freddie's presence left them in awe. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply doing what only he could do. And that's what Van Halen respected most, authenticity. 3. Steven Tyler. When you're talking about rock and roll attitude, Steven Tyler of Aerosmith was the real deal. Van Halen always saw him as a kindred spirit, someone who didn't just sing, but lived every word. Tyler's raspy voice and flamboyant stage persona inspired Van Halen's early years, when Roth was still figuring out who he wanted to be. Eddie once said that Tyler made imperfection sound perfect. That raw human edge was something Van Halen always aimed for. They admired how Tyler could make a scream sound like poetry, how he could shift from chaos to control in a single breath. It wasn't polished, it was pure rock. 2. Ronnie James Dio. Robert Plant was the god of classic rock. Ronnie James Dio was the voice of metal soul. Eddie loved Dio's precision, how every note felt intentional yet larger than life. Van Halen played shows with Dio in the late 70s and early 80s, and every night they'd watch him from the side of the stage, just shaking their heads in disbelief. Dio didn't just sing songs, he built worlds. His voice carried power, fantasy, and depth that made even the loudest guitars seem small. Van Halen respected that. Eddie once said that Dio's control and phrasing were beyond technical. It was spiritual. In a world full of volume, Dio brought vision. 1. Sammy Hagar. And finally, no one understood Van Halen's love for great singers more than Sammy Hagar himself. After the explosive David Lee Roth years, many thought Van Halen could never replace him. But when Hagar joined in 1985, everything changed. Eddie admired Hagar's range, his ability to go from soulful ballads to arena-shaking screams. But more than that, he respected his work ethic and passion. Hagar didn't try to be Roth, he brought his own fire. Songs like Why Can't This Be Love, Dreams, and Right Now showcased a new side of Van Halen, more mature, more melodic, yet still electric. Behind the scenes, there was real chemistry. Eddie often said Sammy pushed him to explore new sounds, new emotions. And though their partnership wasn't always easy, it produced some of Van Halen's most memorable moments. To Eddie, Sammy wasn't just a singer, he was a brother in arms.
Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon.